Hi, this is Kevin Richardson from FASTech, reseller here in Ohio and parts of Kentucky, and just want to go ahead and do an overview on FeatureBased Mill and FeatureBased Drill inside of Mastercam. Typically in stuff, the terminology of FeatureBased is very broad across our spectrum, but I'll try to go ahead and put a little insight on exactly on how we use FeatureBased inside of Mastercam. The first of all, what you'll notice is you got FBM, which means FeatureBased Mill, and FBD, which means FeatureBased Drill. Those are located inside your Mastercam under your windows under Mill, under the FeatureBased Drill and the FeatureBased Mill icon. So they're there and they're active, and that's kind of where we place them in here in Mastercam. The other things that we're going to go over is programming time. Well, they should be a lot faster when you're using feature-based machining. However, the machining time and stuff, you might want to go ahead and make some alterations. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, the reality from hype. A lot of times when people think that you can do feature-based machining on a lot of different TAM systems and that, you're thinking that your total answer is done. And we're never going to go ahead and try to replace the flexibility or the experience of the machinist. However, you're going to find out through this demonstration that the combination with experience and using feature-based inside of Mastercam is going to be very hard to beat. Now, what information is needed for feature-based and the rules to consider, we're going to be going over those as well. How does feature-based work? Well, obviously it identifies features, and those features and stuff, there again is what Mastercam is going to go ahead and grab. What planes are supported? You'll see a variety of planes that I'm going to be using in its demonstrations. So there isn't just a limit of planes, but how do you utilize them? And we'll be going over those. The next thing it's going to wind up being is we want to go ahead and do library for material feeds and speeds. This has always been a question outside of the area net of, well, if you have feature-based, all CAM systems should know your exact feed and speed, what you're doing by the material. Well, you got to understand that also there's information to be placed in there. How you holding it, what type of holder, how long does it stick out. All those things make a big difference. But there again, I'll show you how I use a little bit of feature-based machining, and hopefully you'll understand a little bit more. I like to use standard libraries. When we first start out, I'm just going to be using the defaults, exactly what Mastercam has. When we're doing a vertical, horizontal, or a 5-axis mill, and always people question the lathe. Can you use it in a lathe? I'm kind of using on all of them. So there again, the skills are still needed. There again, feature-based is a great way to get something done. It helps you pick and select items. That's exactly what it's going to be used for. But it's not going to be taking the thinking of the machinist completely out. So I wanted to make that sure that's clear as we go ahead and do the demonstration. You do have a variety of things you can place in there, and Mastercam can do a lot of those things and calculations for you. However, keep in mind the machinist and still has a lot of flexibility inside of this. So let's go ahead and get started. I have a simple part net that I have in here that has a lot of holes in here and some counter bores. My 00 is over here in the corner, and one way that I don't want to do it is I don't want to go ahead and obviously select them individually. That would take me a long time. The other thing I don't want to go ahead and do is do some creation. It's already done and it's in a solid. So with the rule of feature-based drill is one of the things it just has to be a solid. So we can simply go ahead and do this by an analyze or an F4 and grab the part. You can see it's a closed solid body. So I feel very comfortable that this one here I'll start going ahead and doing feature-based right away. If you have a surface in that you start with and it has a nice tight surface, you can still use that by hitting the solids and selecting your from surfaces and making a solid first. But it does need to be a solid to use this. So as I say toolpath and go ahead and go into feature-based drill, the next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is give you an idea of what some of the formats you'll be using. For an example, in this case, you'll notice that I have a sorting option, and I'm not too in particular worried about the sorting option at this point. You see I have holes all the way through here and all over. One of the things if you want to make geometry is on a level is you can actually go ahead and put some vectors and points and actually choose a level to place that on there. And in this case I'm not looking to go ahead and make any geometry. I just want to get an output from there. So the next thing I want to go ahead and do is go to the hole detection. Now in this first part we're going to be doing, it's just going to be a simple vertical machining center. Nothing major, just an X, Y, and Z. So I have some options I want to go ahead and do. I know I want to look at the include of blind holes and chamfers, and I'm really not worried about split holes at the moment. I also am only working with one plane, not going from the top or the bottom. So everything's coming from one plane. And what plane am I working from? It indicated right here, going from the top. Now the next thing I'm going to go ahead and take a look at is my holes seem to be fairly quite big. In other words, I don't know exactly what size they are, but I feel very comfortable with it that they're over 31 thousandths. If they're not, you can always adjust these. Now I'm going to go ahead and put 31 to 2 inches on here, because anything between that area I want to go ahead and drill or circle mill. Now one of the things we can wind up doing too is we're using hole mapping. And if, for example, that you're working with a dumb solid, which many of people do, which means you don't have a solid history, you're able to go ahead and place a library of things you want to happen beforehand. For an example, if this in particular model, I want to go ahead and add 0.201 hole, so in other words, if any of these holes are 201 in this area, what do I want to do with that? Well, I can simply go ahead and click on the drill and do a tap to the right hand. I also can have a selection of what that's going to wind up doing. If it's a 118, a 201, however I want to do that, in case I want to do a core to 20. So the diameter, if it's 201, and if it's 201, the hole type is going to be a tap right hand, it's going to do a core to 20. And you can save these in your map and you can make as many as you want. And there again, what this does is if someone goes ahead and draws that 201, it automatically is going to take that hole and make a drill and a tap as well. In this case, I don't think I have any of those shown, but it's very handy to go ahead and use this if you need to. Now the spot drilling, we're going to go ahead and run a spot drill through it first, and then we're going to go ahead and do the pre-drilling. And they're just activated so you can see them being done in this method. Now the hole milling is something that I want to go ahead and go over very quickly. In other words, it's not a whole training session inside of FeatureBased, but let me show you how I'd wind up doing some of these steps. Any of the counter bores, through holes, or bottoms that are over 625. In this case, you can still go ahead and do 5 divided by 8, and you can do that as well. If they're over 625, I want you to go ahead and make a circle mill operation. And in the circle mill operation, you'll notice I'll just bypass all this very quickly. The reason why is because I'm actually going to go ahead and control most of it after I'm done with my feature base. The next thing I want to go ahead and look at is tools. You'll understand that I'll go ahead and I'll get rid of create only standard tool sizes quite a bit, because I don't really care about if it's a standard tool. Let it make the tool it looks for the hole, and then I'll adjust later so I know exactly what size the hole is going to be. I don't want to get a false impression and make a standard size and the hole something different. I also wind up going up here to the tool selection and noticing that inside of this I have no tools selected yet, but I am going to use the library right now, which is going to be the mill inch library. I'm not too concerned about hitting the part because in the linking parameters it knows exactly where the solid is, and you can simply go ahead and put your clearance height or from the stock model and put a value that you need to right there. Now to make this very simple, all you have to do is go to the features and there's a detection box that's up at the top. I can simply hit the detect button and you'll notice that all these holes are automatically populated. You'll also know that what we got here is you can go by size. If I left click on the size, you'll notice it starts at 312 and it continues to go all the way down. And this is a great way to go ahead and get started on it. So if I want to, without doing any other changes, I can simply go ahead and hit the select OK button and tell it what the NC file format is. Very quickly here, Mastercam will go ahead and repopulate all the information that I just told it. There again, OK, and done. With a quick, simple click of a button, Mastercam is able to go ahead and do all those holes and circle mill exactly what we were just talking about. And I'll slow this down so you can see those. And I'll turn off the rapid so you can see the holes going through. You can also go ahead and find out that it's going to be doing some circle mills in those one areas. And I'll wait for that to come up. So there again, drilling. And then of course it'll be circle milling. As you can see my time bar come up and there's a circle mill. So very quickly I was able to go ahead and get all the holes in this plate. Now the one thing I want to do is I told you that you didn't have to have a stock to go ahead and actually run FeatureBased Drill. However, you might want to go ahead, and I'll go ahead and minimize that so I can just collapse at one time. And you can go ahead and just minimize these by here. And you can start to see that if I try to verify, it's going to go ahead and pick up whatever stock was in there previously. So in other words, I told you that we don't need to go ahead and have a stock being done prior. But look, when you get ready to verify it, it's going to wind up being whatever the stock was previously. So at this time, we want to go ahead and put a stock in there. So I come over to the properties, into the stock, and perhaps maybe just go ahead and say all entities. Something that you can go ahead and notice that I have the red phantom line across. Now when I go ahead and do a verify, I can simply go ahead and turn off my workpiece. I can go ahead and play it, and you'll see that it'll put all the holes in and do all the necessary counterbores in the circle mills as I just wanted to. So that's one quick way of getting it done. The other thing about this one here is you can go ahead and change your feeds and speeds individually. That's really nice that I didn't worry about those, for example, circle mills. So watch as I go ahead and kind of manipulate some of these things as well. One of the things I can wind up doing is when I'm done and I like what I got, I simply go ahead and take the ghost, which is the feature-based drill. I can simply go ahead and left click on that and delete that. And when I delete that, what that means is I can go ahead and say yes, and now they're individually independent from each other. Well, what I mean by that is I can take 15 and 16, which was my circle mills, and I can simply just move them up to the top if I want to. Now those will be the first ones to go rather than the drills. So you have total control of what you want to do and how you want to do it. I also went ahead and went to the toolpath, go to the tool manager, and you can see all the tools that it populated very quickly. Now this is a simple one with a simple plane, and let's do something a little bit different. I'm going to go ahead and say File, Open. In this case, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to grab what we do is a horizontal. So I'm going to left click on a part, say no to this, and there's a horizontal. Now what I want to go ahead and accomplish on here is I really want to go ahead, and this is the face, and if you notice, if you're at the front, that's going to be B0 and this is going to be B180. So the whole part of it is I want to go ahead and only do these holes and not the top and bottom. So we're going to do some isolation. Well, let me give you two ways that you can wind up doing this. One way is I can simply go ahead and make a plane onto the solid face and just tell it what my X, Y, and Z are. Now I'll just go ahead and place my X, Y, and Z 0 right there and select OK. But I am going to go ahead and tell it this is winds up being my B0. Now, keeping that in mind, the next thing I'm going to wind up doing is, since I made a plane, I can go back into toolpath and actually simply go ahead and do FeatureBased Drill. When I do FeatureBased Drill, the next thing I can wind up doing is I can go to the setup. In this case, when I do the setup, I am worried about how the rotation or the sorting option goes. I do not want it to go this way, then down to the bottom, then up, and waste my travel time. I'd rather make it nice and easy. So I simply go ahead and grab on the sorting option and grab what they call as point to point, which will be the nearest. And then I can go ahead and select OK. When it asks me for the sorting point, just go ahead and simply grab or in the location where you want to, close to where your point is. That's all you have to do. It's nothing major. The next thing is the hole detection. Now last time we kept it at the top plane. In this case, we want to go ahead and go all the way down to where we make it to where it says B0. So that's what I want to go ahead and do is the B0. I am going to go ahead and continue with my 31 thousandths and my 2 inches. But in this case and stuff, what I want to go ahead and show you is how I can split these things up. So these holes are maybe a little bit bigger than these here, but I'm not worried about this side at this time. I'm only working on this side. So with the limit to B, 0, the next thing I want to go ahead and do is I'm not going to spot drill this time. I'm just going to do a regular drilling. I know that the tools are set the way that I asked for, and if you ever want to go ahead and keep these here, you can simply go ahead and do your saving library up here, so you don't have to go ahead and grabbing each page and selecting them every time. If I want to go ahead and save this, I can simply save that and override the previous one. Now the next thing I want to go ahead and do is I want to go ahead and go to the features. And there again, as I grab the features, you'll see that very quickly my features come up and I'm able to go ahead and drill what I want. You'll also notice that my diameters, if I click on them, there's 2 1/2 inch and a couple of the 562. There again, Mastercam's feature-based drill is not only going to go ahead and do the holes, but it knows exactly of how far it needs to go as well. So you never have to worry about working into a 2D realm area. Your depths and holes and sizes will all be exact. Once I select OK, very quickly I'm able to go ahead and backplot that and knock my 1/2 inch holes in first, then along with my rotations of my 562. Now that's one way to do it. So let's go ahead and open that again, and let's go ahead and do it a different way without making any planes. And this is what makes Mastercam's feature base so quick. Now the other way I'm going to wind up doing it, I pulled it up from scratch. I still want to do these holes, and I also want to do the holes on the other side. Well, I don't want to make planes in this, so I can simply go ahead and say toolpath, and I use a FeatureBased Drill. When I use a FeatureBased Drill method this time, I'm simply going to go into the setup, still go ahead and do the sorting option, and make sure that's point to point, and I can grab where I want to start at again. And this time if I go hole detection, I'm actually going to go ahead and say don't check any of these planes. And what this is going to wind up doing is looking at all the holes in all the areas. I also want to go ahead and do one more thing. I really don't want to go ahead and do all of them, for example, and drill all. I want to drill this side and maybe end mill or circle mill that side. Well, the same thing applies. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and tell it that anything over 700 thousandths, I want you to go ahead and do a circle mill option. That being proven, I go to my tools. I can utilize any tools that are available or make any that I need to, and simply grab my features. When I detect my features up at the top, you'll see that I'll have tremendous amount of holes that are placed in there, and much more than just the front and the 180. So here's what we have. We know we have holes in the front, 180, top and bottom. So that's exactly what we're going to take a look at. All I have to do is simply go ahead and click on plane, and it puts them all in order. Now I understand that I want the back because my back holes are right here, but I don't want the bottoms. I can simply click on the bottom and hit the shift and go ahead and tell it that I want to suppress anything that's selected, so that's okay. What that does is it makes it inactive, so it's not going to go ahead and output those. The same thing with the top. I simply go ahead and come out this way, use the plane or suppress, and tell it I want to go ahead and make it selective. Now everything that I wind up outputting is going to simply go ahead and be the back and the front. You'll notice there again all these here are circle milled and all these ones are drilled. By simply hitting the OK selection, giving it the NC file name, I did many different things. In this case, as I backplot, as I go through, I went ahead and drilled that, and I circle milled each one of those. And you're done. Now, with the circle mill being abled, or being and making sure that it's abled, when I go ahead and do the cutting parameters, you still have some options you want to do. These are all choices that you want to make afterwards. So you have there again, total flexibility. For an example, maybe the first one that I have, I'm going to get rid of the FeatureBased Drill name, and I'll delete this. And now what that means is these are independent from each other. So what is that, and how does that affect me? Well, if I want to, I can simply go ahead and say, well, anything in a circle mill on the WCS, I'd like to go ahead and put on a G55. Then what I'll wind up doing is I'll just simply go ahead and select OK to it and do a back plot, and you'll notice that I kept the offsets the same. I'm just going to go wind up actually posting out with a different offset other than the B0. So for example, I have B0 and B180. If I post that out, I'm using the post. Simply say select yes, and there again as I do my output, you'll notice that I'll have B180 and of course G155. So that works out very well with this part. So I was able to go ahead and get things I want done very, very quickly. Now let's do something a little bit different. We went ahead and did the vertical. We wound up doing a horizontal. Well, if we have something of a 5-axis path, well, I can simply go ahead and grab something of this nature. This one here, what I'll wind up doing is this could wind up being into a 5-axis rotation or wherever it needs to be at. And I know that I go ahead and pick them all at one time, but that's probably not the most efficient way to do it because they're going to be all over the place, and I don't want to have a long list of line. So one thing is to organize them. For an example, we know already that I can go ahead and do the top just as I've done before, but let's do something on a different angle. This one here, I'm actually going to go ahead and grab the plane, and if I want to, I can simply go ahead and grab the solid face, and there I go. I can move it over XYZ however I choose to. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and put my 0 right there, and I'm going to go ahead and call this one FTI. So FTI is my new plane. There again, I can say toolpath, FeatureBased Drill, and simply go ahead and go into the hole detection and tell it I want to go ahead and limit my search to FTI. Once I do FTI, I can simply grab my features, grab detection, it looks at the hole on the part, it also notices my chamfers, and then go ahead and make a selection and select OK and go ahead and put the NC file in there. Remember, the very powerful thing is it knows where every single depth is on this, so it will not go past the drill depth, which many times could lead into a problem because it would actually go through this part and scrap this, so you don't have to worry about that manual issues that some people have. Well, let's do something on the mill a little bit. As I say file open, the next thing I'll wind up doing is I'll go ahead and grab another part. Now there again, this part will start off as very simple, and I'm going to go ahead and give you some rules on FeatureBased Mill. The FeatureBased Mill works as this. As I go ahead and grab this one here, I need to go ahead and have two things. This time I need a solid, but I also need to go ahead and make sure that I have stock. So watch what happens. I'm going to close this side down and basically go ahead and tell it a new machine. Matter of fact, I'll just get rid of everything as soon as I get a chance. I'll explode everything. Machine type, mill, and I'll just grab a mill default. With a mill default done, if I go ahead and say toolpath and do a feature-based mill, it's going to give me a solid feature detection error, and that's not what I want. And what it's telling me is I need to go ahead and at least let them know what the boundary or a machine stock is. And that's very simple to do. All I have to do is go into my stock setup, tell it I'm going to use all entities, and it'll put a bounding box all the way across there. Now, I'll go ahead and get rid of this machine group up here because I really don't need it. I'm working with something that's scrap. In other words, all the way from start, I want to go ahead and make sure that I grab my tools. Now, here's what's going to happen. If you let Mastercam or any system in that go ahead and utilize or pick your tools, they have pros and cons to it. One, it'll go ahead and get your part done fairly quickly, but the problem is you might not have those tools in the carousels of the machines, and you wind up taking longer putting new tools in and touching them off as you did. Well, let me give you two ways of how I would approach it. One is, if you notice in the tool manager, I have no tools that are listed. So in this first scenario, I'm actually going to go ahead and pick everything from Mastercam and have Mastercam pick my tools. I'll say toolpath, I'll simply go ahead and do feature-based mill, and then what I'll wind up doing is I'll tell it I want you to automatically grab my features. I do want to rough and finish the outside of it, and I do want you to go ahead and do the preferred tooling with this library and create new tools as needed. Now, with that being said, as I go ahead and go to the features and click on the detect, it will organize and put all the features, and you can see a green flag, which means I'm able to go ahead and do all those that be machined. In other words, this whole part can be machined. As I select OK, it's going to go ahead and put the tools that it thinks inside this part, and typically a machinist would wind up saying, well, I like to do the biggest tool and then I go back in with a smaller tool. However, that's not their approach on everybody that they want to do. Myself included, what I want to go ahead and do is if I have a tool that's in the machine, I want to go ahead and use dynamic toolpath or dynamic feature base with inside of Mastercam to make it much faster, and programming time much faster as well. Now we can see that I have quite a bit of toolpaths on here, and it's going to go ahead and cut the part, but however it's going to cut the way that Mastercam felt that it needed to. And right off the bat, if I do a machine type area, you'll notice it put a pretty big tool in there because I never told it what to stay within what range. I just had Mastercam pick it. Now let's try a different solution on how this would work and much more faster as well. I'm simply going to go ahead and delete the feature-based option and say yes. The next thing, I'll just do it again. Now I'm starting from scratch, but this time here's a method that I choose to use a lot. I'll go ahead and do a toolpath in the tool manager, and I'll simply have all these tools in here, and I'm going to get rid of every single one of them. So I'm going to start with a clear spot into the MCX. Now with Mastercam, I can go with a library or make a library of my own. In this case, you can simply see that I just made a library of 3/8 and a 1/2 inch. If I drag up my 3/8, it's for aluminum, and I can go ahead and make these libraries however I want. All my feeds and speeds are included with this. So now with my tool being chosen quickly and first, now I'm able to go ahead and say toolpath, feature-based mill, and I can simply go ahead and do a couple different changes. One of the changes what I'll wind up doing is I'm only going to go ahead and use the tools in the MCX. That's it. The only one I want to use is a tool that I have. What's really going to help me with this is there again, the guy does not have to retouch off his tools. I'm going to go ahead and utilize this very quickly. The next thing is I grab the features and go right into detect. Once I detect the features, you can see I can still go ahead and cut everything that I wanted to, but now when I go ahead and say an NC file, you'll notice that it generates much more quicker and gives me a little bit less toolpath operations. Now look at that. That's very quick, very simple to do. However, I'm not done. I even want to make it a little bit more easier and better. When I go into the feature-based high area, I can go ahead and play that, and you'll notice that I go right into that area and it's going to move over in a couple of different spots and drop deck down. Well, that's not bad, and it's doing what I want it to do to a point. I want to stay down in this and use dynamic. Notice that it chooses area mill. Well, this is very simple to do. What I'm going to wind up doing is I'm going to go ahead and left click on feature-based mill because I don't need it anymore. I really don't want to go ahead and repopulate anything, and I say yes. Now when I go over to the 2D high speed, I simply go in the parameters, and besides using the area mill, I'm just going to go use the dynamic area mill, which means it's going to go ahead and produce and stay into the part. Very efficient manner to go ahead and cut this. I'm going to go ahead and tell it the step over is 10%, and as simple as that, when I select OK and regenerate, I'm able to go ahead and get a totally different toolpath to stay inside of that. So I did two things. One, I did go ahead and utilize Mastercam's feature-based machining, but I still controlled it with the power of the machinist to find out how and what I want to go ahead and do with that. There again, it makes it more of a hybrid approach and doing your feature base. If I go ahead and backplot this and play it, you'll notice how I streamlined everything nice and easy and stayed into that part and cut it very, very quickly. Same thing along with the other one. So I'm finishing with the pocket, and then of course maybe let's try the outside. So let's take a look at what the outside's doing. I come across there and play, and you can see that it's coming across, skipping areas, lifting up into certain areas that I don't want to, and all the yellow means it's lifting up. But it's not a bad toolpath, it's just not what I want to do. You'll notice I'm using core mill. I simply go ahead and go into parameters. I go ahead and do the toolpath type, and I simply take a look at the dynamic core. When I do dynamic core, I'll just make sure that the parameters are set right for my step over, and I select OK, and then of course I'll regenerate. And now I got a quick, efficient toolpath that I feel very comfortable that's going to be able to cut what I need to. There you go. If I want to go ahead and verify that, select all and verify. Play it, speed it up, and you can see how I'm just whittling out that whole pocket. Very simple, very easy to go ahead and do with Mastercam's feature-based machining. Done. Now let's go to another one. There again, file open. And sometimes in that, someone wants to go ahead and combine a couple things together. Well, in this case, we'll do a feature-based mill. In this case, we've got a 2.5D. I always go ahead and use 2D before I do 3D. And we see a little bit of 3D in here if we choose to. In other words, I really don't want to come in here with a big cutter and kind of cut that down. So watch how we go ahead and attack this with the things that we learned today. My 0, 0 is right here. I'm not worried about the feature-based drill. However, if I'm using feature-based mill, I need to put a stock in there. So we'll do that first. I go to stock. I simply go ahead and say all entities. And I have my box of what I want. The next thing I want to go ahead and do is if I hit toolpath and go down to tool manager, I want to go ahead and maybe place a tool in there. I simply select a different library, grab my feature-based tool library, and I'll use that 3/8 as we talked about before. So now I went ahead and told it what tool I wanted to use. Now when I go ahead and say toolpath into the feature-based mill, I'm simply going to go ahead and let it do rough and finish the outside of the part. I only want to use the tools in my MCX, that's it, that I chose myself, and I can simply go ahead and go to my features and then detect what I'm going to cut. In this case, you can see that I can't get this zone, which was that radius that's there right here where tool mismatches. But I can go ahead and select OK and finish what I have there. Now that completely went ahead and roughed and finished out everything that I needed. In this case, if I just minimize this and backplot it, you'll see that there again, and I have to select that obviously. There we go. You can see my folders aren't selected. Now they are. When I backplot that, I go ahead and hit the backplot, and you'll see that there again, I'm running through this part, and I can make it more efficient by using the core method, and we understand from there. But it was very efficient to go ahead and, especially if you're getting one part out and you need to go do quick programming, how quick this can be. Now I'll also do the drill in here, so I'll go ahead and minimize this, and then I'll say toolpath, and I'll use the FeatureBased Drill. With FeatureBased Drill, I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to do the hole detection at the top. I'm not going to go ahead and spot drill anything, and I'll go ahead and use my features to detect all the holes. All the holes look good. I can select OK to it, and there again, I'm able to go ahead and do FeatureBased. Now if I ever come back into any of these things here with FeatureBased Drill, keep in mind that even though the hole type is here, I can at any time detect a hole type and tell it it's a reamed hole for that hole. So you can kind of go ahead and go back and forth. It works out very well that way. So now what I want to do is I can simply go ahead and put a little bit of 3D action into it as well. So very quickly I want to do the outside to the top, and I want to go ahead and surface this area. Well, that's not part of FeatureBased Drill or Mill, but it gives you a good idea on how quick you can get things done. I'm simply going to grab this flow line and grab perhaps maybe just this area right in here to give you an idea. When I do the flow line and I do a cut direction, I can go ahead and see that I'm going from the top to the bottom. I can go ahead and select OK and select OK one more time. And I'm not worried about even not getting a ball end mill. We'll say for an example that they're not too much worried about the finish, but they do want to go ahead and have it close in that area. There again, with one tool, I can simply go ahead and tell it the distance, select OK, and simply backplot that and have a quick way of doing a 3D toolpath all the way across there. So there again, using combinations of your knowledge and experience with FeatureBased makes programming very, very quick. Now a lot of times what I do is I get people to go ahead and tell me that they want to go ahead, and I'll pull this over here, but they want to go ahead and do something with a lathe. Well, the lathe is not based on feature-based machining, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So say for an example that I have a lathe part that's up here, and we have our 0, 0 and everything else that we have. If you're doing lathe, you'll see that you're looking at the top and we're in a lathe position. And then we hit F9 here. What I'll wind up doing on here is I'm going to take a look at doing the same thing as I did before with my feature base. I'm going to look at the right hand side and get all the mill done. Now why would I use that? Well, if you look at the lathe, which I have up here, you'll realize if I say toolpath, mill, I do not have the option of feature base. However, here's one way to go ahead and do it, and it works out fairly well. I can actually go ahead and say machine type, mill, and just go ahead and pick any mill that I want. That being said, I can grab my plane, name view, and I can simply go into the right side view. Once I'm in the right side view, then I can actually go ahead and say, okay, well let's go ahead and do a machine type. In this case and stuff, when I do the machine type, I can load my tools or not load my tools. I'm not going to load anything on this part, but I probably should go ahead there again, since I've been telling you on my toolpath manager. I'll probably open feature-based toolpath, and then I'll simply go ahead and perhaps maybe grab these tools and pop them in there. Now the next thing I'll wind up doing is I'll go ahead and say in the toolpath I can go ahead and do a feature-based mill, and it's going to tell me a stock's required. Not a problem. In this case I can go ahead and use the stock, or simply go ahead in this case make a stock billet at the same time. When I go ahead and do the stock setup, I can go ahead and tell it I'm using a solid, so it could be a casting or whatever you have, and then I can go ahead and get rid of that. Now what happens is I can simply go ahead and say toolpath into a feature-based mill and go ahead and tell it that I want to only go ahead and rough and finish the outside on the right hand side, only using the tools in my MCX. Once I go ahead and grab the features and select OK, it's going to go ahead and grab what I need to, give it an NC file name, and it's going to go ahead and adjust to what I want. So very quickly I was able to do that, but now there's a little bit of twist as I need to go ahead and put that onto the lathe. Well, if you look at this first one in that, as I pull through there, you'll see as it comes down, there again, a couple things I want to change is that area. You know I like to go ahead and put the dynamic area in there. So I can simply go ahead and change that. Before I change that, however, you'll notice that I'll actually kind of get rid of the feature-based mill if I'm done with it, which I think at this point I am, and I'll select yes. Now when I grab that feature base, I can simply go ahead and tell it the size of dynamic area. It's a dynamic, in this case an area, I want to use a dynamic area. I'll change the cutter to 10% and I'll select OK and regenerate. Now if that's done, what I'll do is I'll simply go ahead, and there's my lathe up here. So I have my lathe, which is right up here. And if I go ahead and grab my mill, I can put it right into my lathe toolpath. Now let me go ahead and grab one more for you. I'm going to go ahead and do the outside of the contour. This one here would be this guy right here. So I don't want to go ahead and do this one because that would be the flat. I want to do that a different way. But I do want to go ahead and possibly go ahead and get this one done. And this one's doing the outside, going across, lifting up all over the place. Well, two things I can do with this one. Right off the bat, I can simply go from a core to a dynamic core. Dynamic core would be right here. And go to the cutter parameter and tell it 10% and select OK. I can regenerate that, and now I've got my dynamic core solution. That's done. I got a nice toolpath going all around there, ripping that out very quickly. Now I'll take this toolpath and I'll put it up into the lathe. So I simply move it up and place it right after here and say yes. Now I'm not too concerned about the mill at this point. I want to focus on the lathe. So watch how we do this. Inside of here, into the lathe, I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, this is what I want to work with. And you can see how my rotary axis here, I can say a y-axis. So that means that everything on the c-axis movement, I'm going to go ahead and use, in this case, we have a y-axis machine. And I will go ahead and put it to a y-axis and select OK. I also want to go ahead and make sure that my toolpath is just set to top and everything else is right. That's the only changes I need to do to make this a lathe. And I'm done. Now the last one of what I'll wind up doing is a little bit different. What I'll wind up doing in here is I'll simply go ahead and make sure it's still looking at the top. When I go ahead and go to my rotary axis, I'll actually tell it it's doing a c-axis amount. And I'll go ahead and select OK and regenerate. Now what's the difference is now when I'm on the lathe into the second one, since I'm using the c-axis, I can simply hit S for step and you can see its action go ahead and make my part go around and do a c-axis cut very quickly, very easily. So even though FeatureBased is not part of the lathe, I'm able to go ahead and manipulate it just by going ahead and grabbing a mill, getting what I needed done, and placing it into my lathe. Hopefully this helps you.